This is one of my favorite volume covers of One Piece. It's volume 48 during the Thriller Bark arc, and it just has Oars screaming his head off like, roar! And then Luffy's also there, roar! I really love this cover. Let me know down below what your favorite volume covers are in the story, right? But this is relevant because we are going to be talking about Oars and the ancient giants today. In fact, we're going back even further than Oars. We're talking about the really ancient giants, the most ancient of giants. Yeah. So in the last chapter of One Piece, chapter 1153, we got some, information about King Harald. We got to see how he grew up a little bit with Dory and Bragi, and then his rambunctious youth traveling the world and smashing castles and just being a general jackass kind of thing, right? He eventually meets Ida, a giant that was captive in a circus, but not really captive in a circus, and they form a relationship, and they have Hyruden together. By the way, her name is probably not pronounced Ida, it's probably Ida, because that's the way I's are pronounced in Japanese. It's more of an E sound, but it's the same kind of joke with Colin that I'm going with, where Colin's name is also probably not pronounced Colin, but it sounds close enough to like, yeah, Colin, that's a name. Yeah, Ida, that's a name. We're just gonna call them that from now on. Yeah. So we got some information about geography, too, kind of sprinkled about in the last chapter. It wasn't super relevant. Most of the chapter was focused on Loki being, like, abandoned and thrown into the primordial realm and then clawing his way back up at the end. That was the main impactful thing of the chapter. Like Loki murdering an Elbaphy and Grizzly Bear and then climbing up the tree to get a hug from his mom, all right? So that's relevant, but geography is also included here. We can't forget about geography, ladies and gentlemen. I'm still surprised that we even know the name of the planet now after like almost 30 years of serialization. It's Blue Planet. Okay, 3 pieces of information. Some of this might not seem all that important. Some of it might, but I'm going to go through all of it. Okay, so the first piece of geography information we get in the chapter is the location from where Ida is from. All right, so Harald saves her from the circus, and it was all a misunderstanding, and then they start traveling together. And Ida explains that I'm not from Elbaf, I'm from a island in the South Blue called Samuwanai. Samuwanai is just Japanese for it's not chilly here. It's not very cold here. Being in the South Blue, from what we've seen with most islands in the South Blue, it's a rather tropical part of the world, okay? Interestingly enough, Saul is also from the South Blue, and he also mentioned to Robin on O'Hara that not all giants come from Elbaf, and I come from a place in the South. I was not raised in Elbaf, all right? So I'm thinking there might be an island where giants live in the South Blue, where Saul and Ida both came from, and that island was Samuwanai. There's probably other islands scattered all over the Four Blues and in the Grand Line where giants tend to live, okay? I'm imagining, like, giants left Elbaf a long time ago, probably maybe even like in the first age or in the second age or something, and set up like various locations in other places of the world where they would hang their hats and have their families and things like that, right? Okay, so not super important, but it adds another island onto the grand map of One Piece, all right? And apparently there's like millions of those. Way back in Oden's flashback, Marco mentioned to Inuarashi and Nekomamushi that there's like millions and millions of islands, so we gotta hurry up on that. I don't even think we have 100 yet. We might actually have 100, but we don't have much more beyond that. So we need to hurry up. We need to add more islands. Okay, so that's that. The next thing is because she mentions she was from the South Blue originally, and King Harald was traveling around the New World, he mentions, oh, you must have traveled over the Great Blood-Soaked Serpent. And Ida's like, you mean the Red Line? Oh, yeah. I guess people call it that too. So, Great Blood-Soaked Serpent. This is a deep cut. This is a callback, all right? Way back at Little Garden, Dory and Bragi mentioned that as the only thing that their weapons could not pierce was the Great Blood-Soaked Serpent, all right? This, even back then, could have been a reference to the Red Line. A lot of people theorized that it was this giant, imposing red rock wall that no one can pass by, especially since Little Garden takes place shortly after Reverse Mountain. It's only like a story arc and a half after that, where we met Laboon, and Laboon was constantly crashing his head against the red line. We assumed, I mean, like, Laboon could have been trying to do that in order to get back to the Rumbar crew and Brook, but then we see that other pod of island whales at the New World trying to break through the red line as well. So, Laboon might have had a special reason, but it seems like all the island whales in general are really pissed off that the red line exists and they want to break through it. It also seems like the giants are rather pissed off that the red line exists and they want to break through it, okay? So pause for that. We're going to get to the third geography thing in the chapter, then we're going to roll back to the red line, because that's like kind of the big deal here, all right? The third thing is that we see Harald traveling all over the world. He goes to Fishman Island, and he also goes to Wano. It isn't directly shown, like specified in a title box, that he was in Wano, but we see him approaching an island that looked very similar to the outskirts of Wano, and he lifts up one of the ships, and if you zoom in, you can see like samurai, like people with the top knots and the katanas on top of the ship. So he was in Wano, all right? And he pulls out a compass, and the compass starts spinning like crazy, because if it was an ordinary compass, it would not be working in the Grand Line because of the magnetic poles and everything like that being messed up with the island and everything. So regular compasses don't work. So he was talking about different navigational techniques that the giants had employed for hundreds, probably thousands of years, that the rest of the world might not have known about. Now, granted, the people of Wano are rather isolated. Even back then, they've been isolated since like the end of the Void Century, so like around 800 years. This was around 100 years ago, a little bit of like after that. I think it was like around 70, 80 years ago that Harald went there and was teaching them about like the pole star, like the North Star. Like, hey, did you know that there was a star that doesn't move in the sky? It's really handy for navigation. So this brings up a few questions to me. Like, when exactly did the people of this world discover like log pose technology and the eternal pose to start navigating through the Grand Line using the island's unique magnetical, is that a word? I don't know. Magnetic charge in order to go from island to island. And even more especially, like, you understand the way the log poses work are kind of unique, right? They lock onto an island's magnetic charge, and then it records that magnetic charge, and then it gets overrided by the next island's magnetic charge. That's a little bit unusual, right? So did this technology always exist, or like during the Void Century, did it not exist before then? And then did people have to figure it out at some point after? Was it after the creation of the Red Line? And I'm saying creation of the Red Line because it seems very apparent to me at this point, especially when we were looking through the Harley and we learned a lot about the First Age and the Second Age and the Third Age, the Red Line was not a thing that always existed on this planet, okay? So that's interesting. I'm not saying King Harald, like, invented the concept of the log pose, but also remember, it was mentioned many times how dangerous the Grand Line is to travel. I mean, it still is, but it was talked about like, yeah, you go back even a few centuries, it's even more dangerous, right? It got the reputation as the pirate graveyard for a reason. So imagine trying to navigate that sea without a log, or before the log was even known to the people of the One Piece world, right? Like, did Nolan use a log pose or an eternal pose? Was it ever mentioned during his flashback? Because that was 400 years ago for Nolan. If Nolan didn't have access to this technology, and he was navigating through other methods like as best as he could, Nolan was a real badass. So, like, you can't navigate with a regular compass because the magnetic charge is all messed up, right? It just spins like crazy. But there are other ways to navigate, like astronomy, you know, reading the star charts and everything like that. Problem there is that the weather is always crazy in the Grand Line, so you can't really rely on having a clear view of the sky all the time. I guess you could also navigate utilizing, like, sunstones and things. That's the way Vikings used to navigate back in our day. So even on a cloudy day, you can at least figure out the general position of where the sun is. You know, if the sun rises in the east and sets in the west on Blue Planet the same as it does on our planet Earth, then you could kind of maybe figure out at least a bearing there. There was also a way to navigate called Dead Reckoning, which is not a great way to navigate. There's a lot of issues with it, but it's better than nothing, I suppose, right? So, like, if Noland was using those methods and before log pose technology, and there were other people that sailed the seas using other methods, it's interesting that Harald seems to be like, oh yes, the giants have navigational means that were handed down through, the Elbathian elders for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, that the rest of the world doesn't know about. Interesting. Okay, so moving back to the red line here. Let's say, and I'm going off on a lot of headcanon here, but let's say at one point, and I don't think this is really all that ridiculous, giants ruled, like, the entire world. Like, during the First Age, let's say, or maybe even before the First Age. We learn about the secret hidden part of the Harley text, where there's the Zero Age, like, there's always a zero, right? Like, it's always like Bleach, it's like, oh, here are the 13 squads, the Gote 13. There's actually a Zero squad. It's like, okay, yeah. So giants, let's say, ruled at one point. Now, these were the ancient giants. What do I mean by ancient giants? Did you ever get a good look at Onigashima lately? I mean, it's at the bottom of the ocean in Wano, but did you get a good look at Onigashima? Yeah, there's a mountain on Onigashima that kind of sort of looks like the skull from Black Clover. Yeah, that's immediately what I thought of. By the way, what's going on with Black Clover? I know that a season 2 was just announced. I can't even remember where the Black Clover anime left off. Did we finish the Spade Kingdom arc? Did that even end? Or did it cut off somewhere in the middle? I feel like it cut off somewhere in the middle. I don't even remember. Anyway, it's a giant skull, right? Okay, great, fantastic. So, that giant skull, if it really did belong to a giant, it was way bigger than any other giant we've seen in the story. Bigger than Dorian Bragi, bigger than Loki, King Harald, bigger than Ors Jr. The entire, Onigashima raid took place inside of or on top of this thing's head. So I think Oda from, the background was basically like, yeah, this is a big epic battle where the Straw Hats are fighting the Beast Pirates and everything. But remember, this whole battle of, Luffy and the Scabbards and, Zoro and Kid and Law and Killer and everybody fighting against Kaido and Big Mom, that was happening on top of this thing's skull, of how massive this thing used to be, all right? So, trying to piece all these things together, the ancient giants that were the size of mountains back in the day lived and controlled the entire world. And from what we know about the Harley text, the first realm, the first world, really sucked. It wasn't great. It wasn't a fun time, all right? Where there was death and devastation everywhere, really bad times had by all. This could have been the era when the Red Line was constructed or was built, all right? Now, remember how Ors was called the continent puller, right? So it was stated he built an island, he towed islands together, and those islands, actually still exist somewhere in the world. That's what made people think that maybe Wano was the island that Ors created 500-something years ago during his age. That doesn't seem to be the case, especially from what we learn about Wano being, built on top of an older Wano. So, yeah. Now, Ors was a big guy. He was, 67 meters tall or some such. He's a big man. He's not pulling actual continents around. He's not pushing Bikini Bottom somewhere else, right? You know what I mean? He's not grabbing Alabasta and connecting it to Jaya. He's not doing that, all right? He could maybe grab some smaller islands, especially if he had a whole giant crew on his pirate ship, you know what I mean? He had the ancient giant pirates or whatever, right? And so maybe a bunch of ancient giants all working together, roughly the size of Ors, towing the islands, pushing them together. Yeah, maybe it's possible. So what if the title of continent puller didn't originate from Ors specifically, but from the idea that way back in the day, thousands of years ago, maybe tens of thousands of years ago, there were giants that were so freaking massive, they really could pick up Alabasta and just throw it across the world or something. They're that big. It is not ridiculous that they could do that, right? Okay. So, in that case, what if it was these ancient giants of old that literally constructed the Red Line? They were building it like Legos, you know what I mean? They're just connecting the different walls of the Red Line together, All right, we have built a giant red rock wall dividing the world in half. Why did we do that again? I don't know. We're big giants. We can move islands and build things. We built a wall. I was like, all right. So anyway, what if that was the case, right? And then after generations passed, they forget about what happened. The giants forget, or maybe it is a legend somewhere, but it just got, scrubbed from history over the ages. This could have been 10,000 years ago or something ridiculous. We know, generally speaking, the transitionary period between the Second Age and the Third Age would have been the Void Century War. So that would have been roughly 800 to 900 years ago is when the Second Age ended and the Third Age began. Now, when it comes to the First Age ending and the Second Age beginning, that transitionary period, maybe you could say around 3,000 years, because that was the age of the facility that was found on the Adamwood tree, on Yggdrasil. Lilith found this facility that looked very, very advanced, that looked like technology out of Egghead. It was just left here to rot for like several millennia, and Lilith at just a glance was like, yeah, it's about 3,000 years old. So let's say First Age to Second Age, that was 3,000 years ago. Well, we don't know how long the First Age lasted. First Age could have lasted 10,000 years or longer, right? Especially if you want to talk about, like, the primordial realm of Elbaf that's tens of thousands of years old was literally the first place to ever exist, like the first piece of land to ever exist on this planet. Could be something like that, right? Okay, so something happened, Redline was constructed, and that messed with a lot of the animals that lived on the planet, a lot of the marine life, especially the island whales that were dependent on, like, their migration patterns and everything like that. Like, it's a really fascinating thing to look up in our world. So there's a migration of monarch butterflies, right, that fly south, to have their young, to, like, lay eggs and stuff, right? There's, like, a big migration of butterflies. And there's this interesting thing where their pattern will be like they'll be flying and then they'll move in like a weird shape as if like they're flying around something. And the implication is at one point there might have been a mountain range there like millions of years ago or whatever, and the mountain range is no longer there, or it's like erosion or whatever, like continental shifts and things. But the migration patterns of the butterflies are like still so ingrained that they'll still like move around even though there's like nothing there anymore, right? So this is like long periods of time we're talking about here. So the idea that the Red Line could have been constructed tens of thousands of years ago, but the island whales still have this like urge to migrate through this path, and they keep ramming their heads against the Red Line to bust through it. Same deal. Then what if the giants of Elbaf also have this like desire? Now, it might not be something as innate as like migration of the whales. It might just be a test of their strength, right? Like the giants of Elbaf are all about war and power, and it's like, oh yes, trained, strong, honor, dueling, all that kind of stuff, right? Maybe the ultimate prestige that a giant from Elbaf could receive is destroying the Red Line, right? A giant that was so strong they could destroy the biggest thing on in the entire world, this giant red rock wall that stretches up thousands of meters. The giant, like, remember, King Harald was a dude that like picked his nose and just flicked a booger into the water, and it was like a bomb going off, right? Like, that's how powerful giants are, all right? And so none of them, even for Dorian Broggy to fully admit, we cannot even destroy the great blood-soaked serpent. It also connects back to Jormungandr. Jormungandr is the world serpent that like stretches around the entire world, right? Okay, in Norse mythology. Now, there is some theories out there of like, what happens if the Red Line actually is like a giant serpent? Hey, I'm all right with that. It's slumbering like Unicron as Cybertron's moon, but one day it will awaken. Remember Transformers Armada? It's like the only Transformers property I've ever watched all the way through. But like the end of that, when the moon turned into Unicron, when Starscream died, he's like, I'll take you down, Unicron! He didn't. Spoilers, he didn't. But he tried, damn it. All right, it might be something like that where, like, I don't know, there's a Jormungandr mythical zone and someone fed it to the Red Line, and it's just slumbering. It's in the water, so it's weakened, but one day it'll wake back up and... Maybe. Personally, I don't think it's an actual serpent. I don't think it's a living thing. I don't think there's titans in the wall that are forming it. I think that it is an unnatural thing that was constructed. And I'm thinking like, all right, how would this thing be built? You know, it's One Piece. Maybe somebody had some really crazy, weird devil fruit or magic ability to, like, you know, construct it out of the earth, like raise it up or something like that. But also remember, like, do you think the fact that the red line is red is going to be relevant? Like, because this red rock that exists here doesn't seem to exist at any other point in the world. Like, there's never been a moment where the Straw Hats land on an island and they're like, wow, the soil here is red, just like the red line. No, like, this is the one place in the world that it's called that. So it's called the red line, and the Giants call it the blood-soaked serpent. The fact it's made out of this special red rock, I feel like, is going to be relevant. All right, where else did this stuff come from or something? Maybe during the First Age, there were a cluster of islands that were made out of this red rock material that's no longer around now, and then all of the ancient giants back then took these constructs, these islands, and pushed them together and made the red line. Why would these ancient giants make the red line, and then the future giants try to knock it down? I don't know. I'm just trying to think of anything that would be big enough to build this thing. And the only thing that comes close would be the giants that used to be, like the head of which, the skull of which is on Onigashima. That thing would have probably been big enough to do the job. And then also the giant shadow monsters that are in the Florian Triangle. They clearly don't seem to be ancient giants, though, because they don't have horns. They don't have, like, the head shaped as, like, oars. Like, the skull on Onigashima very clearly was an ancient giant. It had horns and everything, although Zoro sliced off one of them, and then I think Kaido melted the other one, so it's not going great right now. But the huge images in the shadows of Thriller Bark, I don't know, Oda could maybe go back and like, oh, it was just in the silhouette, so you didn't get to see their full image, because really they just looked like, and honestly, they kind of looked like Emu a little bit, right? Like these like large creatures that had a very simple shape and just glowing eyes. Maybe that was Emu's family or something like that. I don't know. Emu has, he was like the smallest kid, right? And he was like, oh man, I really need to live up to my family and try to rule the world. You know, my mom and dad are the size of not even bigger than skyscrapers. My mom and dad are the size of continents, and they were able to do crazy things, and I'm just trying to rule the planet. You know, that could be Emu right now, right? So, yeah. And then also going back to the navigational skills that Harold mentions, right? Like, one of the reasons why, like, at the beginning of the age, in the primordial realm and in the First Age and all that kind of stuff, right? Giants were maybe the first people to learn about, like, you know, sea charts and sailing the world and things like that. And that kind of lore was passed down through the ages, and they still have, because Elbaf is such an old country if the primordial realm really is the first place. So they have access to information that the rest of the world has forgotten. Maybe they did learn at one point and then they forgot. Human lifespans are pretty small, or pretty short compared to giants, and so, you know, it's like up to the giants to kind of go around and like refresh everybody's memory of like, oh, that's the North Star, that's how you navigate. It's like, really? That's crazy. North Star, you don't say. Holy shit. This whole time, we never noticed. And just like, yeah, it's okay, right? And that was kind of the whole point of the chapter. Like, Ido was telling Harold that humans are so fascinating, and they have interesting, like, culinary skills and tailoring skills to make clothing and things. And you can learn so much about humans that, you know, don't treat them as insignificant just because you're big and strong. Like, there's stuff there that you can learn about, right? Okay, and that was kind of the whole point. But then there's stuff that the giants could teach humans, and then I'll go, like, Harold, and then that's what led Harold on his mission to go around the world and be like, here are gifts, humans. Here is a giant bottle of wine. And we're all, you know, he's going to Fishman Island. He's learning about stuff there, and he's frustrated because the world government is almost like against Elbaf and the giants, trying to spread out and trying to learn about the world and gain allies in the world. So, like, Harold is frustrated by that. You know, it could be It could be a few different reasons. It could be just like the world government is leery about the idea of like a coalition being formed to fight against it. Kind of the same thing that the world government did against the ancient kingdom. Like they don't want the same thing happening to them. So that's why they try to, control everything with the reverie and all that stuff. Like you have to join the world government, right? But it also could be something of just like, oh, we don't want the giants spreading their knowledge to the rest of the world, because that also might not work for the government, right? That might not work for Emu's plan and everything like that. So that's why they also are trying to push back against that. Like they're really careful about what the Elbathian giants are doing. Could be something like that too. But anyway, yeah. Just some stuff about geography I wanted to mention. We got Samuwanai. We got talking about the blood-soaked serpent. Let me know down below if you think it's like an actual serpent that's going to wake up one day and eat things, or if it's just something that was constructed a long time ago. How was it constructed? Where did the red rock come from? Why don't we see this in any other part of the world? And also the navigation techniques of the Grand Line. Like, when did that start becoming prominent in the world? And, the fact that the giants know about this stuff for, thousands of years and are teaching other people. How about that? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching, everybody. This will be Teching signing out. Later.